All right, welcome to episode 9 of the JP Pod. I want to get right into it today with a Middle East update. We seem to be inching closer to an Iranian strike on Israel. If you remember, Israel killed about 7 of their IRGC leaders in a building near an embassy in Damascus, Syria. News was coming out that there have been desperate attempts at a ceasefire in Gaza over the last couple of days. Iran said that they would not strike Israel if an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza was agreed to, with the full withdrawal of IDF troops along with no operation into Rafah. Reports say that the proposed ceasefire from Israel to Hamas was a temporary ceasefire with full hostage release, but still an operation into Rafah. Iran and Hamas rejected this ceasefire publicly. This could mean that Iran was holding off on an attack on Israel to see if a deal could get reached, and now that it hasn't been reached and has been rejected, that they may strike now that deal hasn't been agreed to. You know, Iran may say, well, if that's the best you got and that's the best that we're going to come to in terms of a ceasefire, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to get involved in this war along with maybe Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies. The IDF has been withdrawing troops from Gaza, except where the divide between northern part and the southern part of Gaza is. Benjamin Netanyahu made a video saying that this is only to let the troops rest and recover before an operation into Rafah begins. So it seems that an operation into Rafah is a non-negotiable for Israel. They believe that this is the last objective that needs to be completed before Hamas is fully defeated. And the United States needs to let Israel complete the job to finish it and also support them along the way. You know, the U.S. was very much against this operation into Rafah, saying that it would be catastrophic for the innocent civilians, that they would have nowhere to go, and that that Israel had a responsibility to house these people in the meantime if they do move into Rafah, which is pretty crazy. I mean, I'm not saying that these civilians should be killed, obviously. Only Hamas members should be attacked, but that the fact that Israel has a responsibility to house people that aren't their own civilians and their own citizens seems pretty crazy to me. The United States did say that they sort of came together and agreed to an operation into Rafah that the United States was okay with, but on top of Rafah, that the United States has been delaying and only hurting Israel in its objective to defeat Hamas. It's only been a speed bump to Israel. The United States has only made things harder for Israel. And, you know, there's many different reasons for that. Obviously, the Biden administration realizes that they're losing voters. They're younger anti-Semitic voters, which appears to be, you know, all of the young voters appear to be anti-Semitic in the Democratic Party these days, sadly. So they realize that they're losing those voters, and this may be a political move to show, like, look, we're not really backing Israel. They're trying to play both sides of the fence here, support Israel, but also be a speed bump to Israel and give the show that they're not supporting Israel to try to appeal to their younger voters. So, like I said, although they said that they're now on board with a Rafah operation into Israel, this is not the only thing the United States has been a speed bump for Israel in. But now, like I said, a ceasefire deal has been rejected from Hamas, and the end of Ramadan is now upon us. Iran may now strike soon within the next coming of days. I talked in previous podcasts about how experts believe the ending of Ramadan could launch an escalation in the Middle East, and now that this ceasefire has been rejected and, you know, there's been reports that Iran has been putting missiles and drones into ready positions, that on top of the end of Ramadan all kind of coming together, it seems that more and more pieces are being placed for an escalation in the Middle East as time goes on. And, you know, Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, has made some threatening speeches, you know, per usual, talking about Israel, saying that the coming days for Israel will be hard for them, and that, you know, decisions have been made in Iran to strike Israel. He also said something about how the process may appear to be long to people, but it's sort of a psychological move towards Israel, that they're anticipating an attack from Iran and they don't know when it's going to come. So more and more threatening rhetoric from Hezbollah and Iran, for that matter. But, you know, the pieces appear to be coming into play for a strike on Israel directly from Iran. And when that happens, that will be probably the biggest escalation possible in the Middle East, because now you have the head of the snake of Iran fully being in a war with Israel instead of just as proxies of, Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. So if that happens, where Iran does strike Israel, that will be the spark needed to launch a full regional war in the Middle East. And, the United States has only enabled Iran in this because we have not shown them strength. We've only shown them weakness, giving them $6 billion for hostages, saying that, oh, well, we're going to track this money to where it can't be used for terrorist operations. Yeah, dummies. Money, just because they're not going to use the exact money that we give them, they can now move money around. $6 billion comes in here. We can move more money here to then launch a terrorist attack. And it was not long after that transfer happened of $6 billion from the United States to Iran that October 7th happened. I don't think that's a coincidence. And the Biden administration thinks that you're stupid to say that, oh, well, we put we're tracking that money, that they're not going to use the exact money that we gave them to use on terrorist attacks. Yeah, maybe not the exact specific money. That's like saying if I give this person $1 and then he uses another dollar that he had to spend it on something else, and now I say, oh, well, he didn't use the $1 that I gave him to buy whatever else he bought. Yeah, he can use other money that he has now that you gave him money to replace that. So they could have used the money. We gave them $6 billion. They can move $6 billion from a different area of their budget to now use to launch an attack from Hamas on Israel on October 7th. So, stuff like that, the United States is continuing to show weakness to Iran, not only Iran, but China, Russia, the whole world, really, all of our enemies. Just like apparently the Biden administration was thinking about taking the Houthis off of the terrorist organizations list for the United States. That's basically a surrender. That's a white flag to the Houthis that you won. Your attacks on ships and hurting global trade has worked, and now we're going to take you off the terrorist. You doing terrorist acts, now we're going to take you off the terrorist list. Please stop. That's the United States. The United States is saying that they lost the war in the Red Sea to the Houthis, and that's complete and utter weakness to these countries in the Middle East, giving them what they want. That's not a smart way to go about things. These aren't diplomatic people, right? You have to show them strength, because especially when you have terrorist organizations. Yes, they're a terrorist organization. The Houthis in Yemen are terrorist organizations. You can't just go start shooting at and enabling trade from other countries in the Red Sea. You can't just start shooting at ships in the Red Sea just for the heck of it, to say that you're supporting the Palestinians in Gaza. You can't just do that. I mean, that is a terrorist attack. To hurt global trade in such an important part of the world like the Red Sea. So many ships come in and out, not just the United States, but countries around the world. You can't just hurt trade globally just for the heck of it because you can. That's terrorism. And the Biden administration saying, oh, well, maybe if we take them off the terrorist list, that maybe they'll stop. They're stupid. They're idiots because they're weak people. They don't know how to show strength to enemies, to, organizations like the Houthis saying, oh, we'll take you off the terrorist list. Just please stop. They're not going to stop at that point. You're only enabling them. So that's the method the Biden administration has gone about with Iran and all of its proxies. Really, all the issues in the Middle East stem from Iran. The United States likes to talk about a two-state solution being the answer. Yeah, it sounds good on paper when you realize if Iran is not dealt with and we continue to enable Iran, a Palestinian state only enables Iran to build a stronger proxy of Hamas in Palestine. So I would love for the Palestinians to be their own state. If that possibility of Iran using that to build a stronger Hamas, if that wasn't a situation that would happen or a possibility, then yeah, I'd be all for a two-state solution. But we have to be realistic. That's not a realistic thing for Iran to not use a Palestinian state to create a stronger organization of Hamas and a stronger proxy to then attack Israel later. The Middle East will be, I wouldn't say completely solved, because I mean, everybody is anti-Semitic towards Israel in that region, it appears. But the situation in the Middle East would greatly improve if Iran is destabilized and we continue to hurt them to where they can't develop nuclear capabilities, which it seems like they're pretty dang close, and stop enabling them and giving them money saying, oh, well, they can't use this for terrorism. That's so utterly stupid to have that line of thinking. You have to show strength to Iran because that's the only message that gets sent to them. Diplomatic weakness does not, you're not going to give them what they want and then they're going to give you what you want in return. No, they're just going to keep taking from you. So you have to continue to show them strength, and the Biden administration is largely to blame for this because Trump hit Iran hard and was hard on the Iranian government to where, they were sanctioned greatly, and people like Soleimani had a target on their back where, look, we don't mess around with you. If your leaders who are threats to not only us, but globally, I mean, they're just terrorists. Anybody who is sad that Soleimani left this planet doesn't know truly who he was. He was a monster. But, the Biden administration wouldn't have the spine to do something like that because they're weak and they're scared of Iran. They're scared of China. They're scared of Russia. They are weak in their foreign policies. So if we continue to let Iran dictate things in the Middle East, this is what happens. When you have terrorists dictating how things go in the Middle East, regional wars like this is what happens. The United States even sort of bashed Israel for conducting that airstrike in Damascus, killing 7 Iranian leaders. Because now they're like, oh, well, now Iran's going to get involved. Oh, what do we do? Instead of saying, good job, Israel, you're taking away, you're putting out these people who are threats to your country. Good job. Good on you. That's a good thing to do. Instead, we're saying, oh, Israel, now Iran's going to get involved. What are we going to do? It's weak, and we don't have control of the situation at all. We're just continuing to scramble and trying to appease Iran. While Iran is dictating things, they're in the driver's seat, and they know it. So they don't have to rush to strike Israel. They are going to take their time and know that they're in the driver's seat in the Middle East. And that's where it is right now because we have weak leaders who are continuing to wanting to enable Iran, and they think, oh, if we give them what they want, then the situation in the Middle East will be good. Just give them what they're asking for. No, idiots. They're asking for it for a reason because they want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And we don't realize that. You have to show strength to Iran. You have to destabilize them if you're going to have any hope for peace in the Middle East because all the issues in the Middle East really stem from Iran. Iran and its proxies of Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. I mean, the Houthis fully shut down, maybe not fully shut down, but they hurt global trade drastically with their actions in the Red Sea. I mean, major corporations just fully couldn't conduct operations and conduct trade in the Red Sea, which is such an important part of the world for trade because we have these terrorists in Yemen who are just wreaking havoc on global trade. That is a terrorist act and a major one. And we're going to say that we're thinking about taking them off the terrorist list to try to appease them and maybe we'll sweet talk our way to get them to stop. No, that's not how these people work. These people are terrorists. They don't listen to weakness. You have to show them strength, and you have to hit them hard to where they can't do stuff like that. Iran is very close to having nuclear capabilities, according to some experts. The Biden administration won't say this globally, and they'll give us the message that they're in the driver's seat in the Middle East. They're not. The United States is losing its power in the Middle East to help protect Israel. And if we continue to show weakness like we have, Israel is at a great threat. So who knows? Maybe Iran will strike Israel within the coming days because I think they're sensing that the United States is not only starting to abandon Israel, but the United States' weakness shown towards Iran, they're not scared of us anymore. They're not scared of that threat of the United States fighting Iran. Like if Iran strikes Israel, they're not scared of the United States coming in and, fighting Iran because they don't think that's going to happen anymore. The U.S. is continuing to show weakness and show that they won't fully back Israel if Iran strikes. So when you have a country like Iran getting more and more enabled and empowered in the Middle East, that's a recipe for a disaster. If you want the Middle East to be more stable and to have peace in the Middle East, the answer is to weaken Iran. And I'm not saying start a war with Iran, start bombing them like people like Lindsey Graham want. I'm saying you sanction the crap out of them. You show them strength in deals to where you show that you're in the driver's seat. And, I'm not against if leaders like Soleimani are, when you have terrorist leaders like that who are a threat to everyone globally, not only the United States, but its allies of Israel, yeah, they should have a target on their back. They shouldn't be safe. And, Iran, look at the situation when Trump was in office. Iran wanted to show strength to its people, and they sent some, they did what we did recently to Iran. Iran sent some fake missiles that were not intended to hit any bases just to show its people, look, we did something, right? That's what the Biden administration just did to Iran. When our 3 soldiers were killed in, I can't remember where they were based, but they were in the Middle East, and, it wasn't Iran directly, but the IRGC, like some militias connected to Iran, killed 3 soldiers. And what did we do? We told Iran, get everybody important out of the area so we don't start a war with you. Please get everybody out of the way. We got to show our people that we're strong and that we're in control in the Middle East, and we're gonna strike some of your meaningless targets just to say we did something. That dictates to you who is scared of who. The United States is scared of Iran now. And when Trump was in office and he showed the Iranians strength, Iran didn't want to start a war with us. They were scared of us. We took out Soleimani, and instead of starting a war back with us, they sent some show missiles that were not intended to hit any of our bases. They were scared of us, and that's how you have peace in the Middle East. And coincidentally, during Trump's administration, there was the Abrahamic Accords in the Middle East, and one of the biggest peace deals in the Middle East ever. And coincidentally, you look now what was in place during the Biden administration. Saudi Arabia and Israel were looking to, embark on historic peace deals, and they were talking about establishing a railway from the Red Sea to Saudi Arabia through Israel, and they were going to collaborate, and it was a great sign of progress in the Middle East between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Saudi Arabia, the biggest Muslim country in the area, and guess who wanted to throw a wrench in that? Hamas and Iran. When you look at the situation when Trump was in office, when the Abrahamic Accords were being done, Iran didn't interfere with that because they were scared of us. And when Israel had deals set in place with Saudi Arabia, they weren't scared of the United States with Biden in office, and they threw a wrench in that, and October 7th happened. And now the Middle East is on fire. Not only the Middle East, look at Ukraine and potentially what could happen in Taiwan. This is what happens when you have weak leaders in office. When you have weak leaders in charge, bad things happen. You have strong leaders in charge who show countries like Iran strength where they can't do what they want to do because they're scared of us. Peace can be accomplished. When you have weak leaders who bow down to terrorists like Biden is doing right now, this is what you get. You get chaos. And now Iran potentially about to strike Israel directly. You have a regional war in the making in that scenario, because when Iran strikes Israel, which appears to be inevitable at this point, especially with the ceasefire deal getting shot down, you will have countries like, Jordan potentially. They're probably less likely. It's probably more likely for Hezbollah to get involved, which is a very sophisticated organization. I do not think Israel alone can beat Iran and Hezbollah. I just don't think that can happen, because I don't know if Israel can beat Iran if Iran sends all of its, if Iran goes 100% in on Israel. I don't think Israel wins in that fair fight. Iran is just too strong militarily. They'll put up a fight for a while, but eventually, Iran, the bigger country, I feel like they'll start to wear on Israel, let alone, Hezbollah and Iran against Israel. This is not taking into account any U.S. support for Israel, because I'm not sure how much the U.S. will support Israel in that scenario. Look at the policies we've had with Israel ever since October 7th. At first it was strong, and now starting to go down, and it appears that we're starting to abandon Israel. So the U.S. doesn't back Israel, and Israel gets in a fight with Iran, and then let alone Hezbollah. You also may have countries like Syria get involved. Iran is the head of the snake in that area, and all the people who hate Israel, Iran is sort of the big dog for them. So if they see Iran get directly involved in the war, that will encourage other countries in the ring of fire sort of around Israel to get involved. You have a full regional war in that scenario. Not good for Israel. So this is what you get when you have weak leaders involved. They're not scared of the United States anymore. And I'll talk about this later in the podcast. We have those same terrorists in our backyard through our wide open borders. And the FBI has even admitted this. So, even if the U.S. did get involved, then they can just activate those cells within our backyards. Now we got a problem on our own hands. So we can't fully support Israel because we're trying to get rid of the terrorists and wreaking havoc in our own country. This is what happens. You have weak borders. You have weak leaders in charge. This is what happens. So all that to say, it's not looking good in the Middle East. Escalation, we seem to be inching closer and closer to escalation from Iran. When Iran eventually does strike Israel, I think it's simply inevitable at this point. They have to. They have to do something. It depends on what level that will be. But the ceasefire not getting reached today, that may be soon because tomorrow, I think, is the end of Ramadan. It's not looking good. And you can thank nobody but Biden for that because he's shown weakness towards Iran. And when you let countries like Iran be in charge and hold power and be in the driver's seat, you get chaos. Speaking of terrorists, I want to talk about the terrorists who committed the attacks in Russia. They testified publicly that Ukraine paid them to complete the attacks. Now, obviously, it's possible that they just said this because they were tortured and they think that's what the Russians will want to hear and they'll stop torturing them. Yeah, that's possible. It's probably probable, actually. But it really doesn't matter because all this does is further validates for the Russians and Putin that Ukraine, along with the U.S., helped facilitate the attacks. It seems that Putin is becoming only more certain that the United States and Ukraine were behind these attacks, and that is not good. It's not good only for trying to put an end to the war in Ukraine, which it seems that the West doesn't want any part in that. They don't want any part in achieving peace in Ukraine. But it also doesn't help in the long run with China and Russia uniting because now Russia is becoming more and more emboldened to do something eventually against the United States if the United States is helping facilitate terrorists in its own country. Obviously the West will claim that the terrorists only said this because they were tortured, but, they were caught fleeing to Ukraine. There are pieces that indicate that the terrorists did have the help of the Ukrainians because they claim that, anonymous people on Telegram paid them to do these attacks. I think it was something like $200,000 each. But, the fact that they were fleeing to Ukraine, it doesn't really make sense for them to flee to Ukraine. You would probably see them taking more of a route to go back to Muslim countries if these were ISIS members. Like I said, whether it's true or not, it really doesn't matter in the sense that it only validates Putin's belief that we were behind it, the Ukrainians were behind this, and we're only meddling ourselves with Ukraine because obviously of our support of Ukraine in the war, but we're not spearheading any peace talks. We're actually shutting down peace talks in Ukraine. So in Putin's eyes, we're continuing to support a fight against his country. So therefore, we're kind of indirectly at war with China. Not kind of, we are. We're using Ukraine as a proxy against Russia. Not only that, but now he's getting further validation in his own head that we helped facilitate these attacks because the Ukrainians, Putin believes the United States really calls the shots in Ukraine. I fully believe that because everybody thinks that. Everybody thinks that the United States calls the shots in Ukraine because you have Zelensky coming to our Congress and demanding we give him more money. So what does that tell you? Who pays for the war? We get to dictate what happens in the war. You don't get to decide that the war in Ukraine is over because when a peace deal comes up, we're going to send Boris Johnson, who is not even a part. He was the prime minister in another country. We're going to send a prime minister of another country to go shut down a war that we're not involved in. So who's calling the shots? It's the United States, and Putin knows this. So we're coupled with Ukraine in anything that happens, especially something as terrible as this. So Putin is further getting validation in his own head that the United States is launching a war against Russia because not only are we keeping a war going That's what we're doing. Ukraine would have lost long ago without our funding. So we're keeping that war going, and we're potentially helping facilitate terrorist attacks in Russia. Now, I'm not saying any of this is true. I'm just saying from Putin's own eyes, this is what he's seeing and what he's believing. It's not good going forward, because like I've already talked about before many times on this podcast, with the new world order forming of China and Russia against us, stuff like this just doesn't help our case any further. And I'll talk a little bit more about China in the next topic. But, true or not, when you have these terrorists testifying in court that Ukraine paid them to do those attacks, that's not a good thing for us, because we're continuing to support this war in Ukraine. You have NATO saying that they want this war to continue for 5 more years. Absurd. Our image towards Russia is not getting any better. When you have terrorists saying that, maybe not you directly, but the country that you're using as a proxy against Russia is paying them to conduct terrorist attacks in Russia, that's not a good look. And like I said, they were fleeing back to Ukraine. There's some pieces to this that make it seem believable that Ukraine had, something to do with this. And obviously Ukraine and NATO, their motive in that situation would be to try to provoke Russia into a wider conflict to start a full-fledged war with NATO. We as in NATO, trying to provoke Putin, get him to break mentally to where he says, screw this, I'm going after NATO and Ukraine. In that scenario, that's what we're trying to do. And it seems sort of makes sense, because if NATO loves to say, like, we don't want a direct conflict with Russia, but yet we're not going to let Ukraine stop fighting, who's not even in our organization, but we want them in our organization. So what are they saying? They want Ukraine in NATO so that Ukraine's fight with Russia could become NATO's fight. So all those pieces show that NATO is not for peace in Ukraine. They want the war to keep going. So if they want the war to keep going and they want Ukraine and NATO, they want that fight to be NATO's fight. What do? Well, if we can't get Ukraine and NATO yet, let's launch some terrorist attacks in Russia, try to get Putin to crack and come at us, so then we can full-fledged fight with Russia. Putin has held restraint. Whether or not you believe any of this, that's what Putin sees, obviously. Putin believes that we were behind this attack. It's not a good thing, because, like I said, that further hurts any chance of peace in Ukraine. I mean, I don't think there was much of a chance anyways, because we're shooting down any sort of chance of peace in Ukraine. But when we have stuff like this, the terrorists testifying that Ukraine helped or Ukraine paid them to do the attacks, that hurts it even more. So Putin has also said some cryptic things towards the United States to further confirm that he's becoming more certain that we were behind this attack in the West. So Putin's restraint is waning more and more, and he's becoming more and more certain that the West is helping Ukraine conduct, attacks like what just happened. But his view of the West is just further, it's getting worse and worse. Whether true or not, you just had the terrorists testify publicly, it's on video, that Ukraine paid for the attacks. It's not a good sign to get peace in Ukraine, but also going forward in the long run with the relations between the United States and Russia. And with China and Russia uniting, it's not good to it's not good to make our enemies more mad at us and to put a further gap between us and our enemies in that scenario. So that's not a good thing. The terrorists are claiming that Ukraine paid for the attacks, there may be some validity to that, but we're going to be meddled in with Ukraine in that scenario, obviously for good reason, because we're continuing to keep that war going and funding Ukraine. Any attack on Ukraine will be an attack on the United States too. And we've done nothing otherwise to make Putin think anything else but that. Well, speaking of terrorists, I want to talk about the FBI put out a terrorist warning for today, with the eclipse being today. Warnings of large gatherings, saying that they're becoming increasingly more concerned that what happened in Russia, that terrorists will be encouraged to do something like that on U.S. soil. open borders have not helped the case, and the FBI has even put out warnings of potential sleeper cells being formed and listed the names of those cities spread across the U.S. And it's also believed that those cells are Hezbollah cells. And, there have been Hezbollah terrorists caught at the border trying to get into our country illegally. So who knows how many gotaways there have been. I mean, the FBI has even said that number can be in the millions, like 3 to 4 million over the last 4 years of gotaways, of people that slip through the cracks. I mean, there's not really slipping through the cracks when your borders are just full-fledged wide open like they are. But the FBI continuing to issue these warnings makes you think that these terrorist cells are waiting to activate together on one day. Because if they haven't done it there hasn't been much, like the FBI put out a warning on Easter saying that they expected terrorist attacks at churches and gatherings for Easter. There wasn't much didn't happen there, and much hasn't happened today yet. Fingers crossed nothing does. But, if those attacks aren't coming to fruition when the FBI is releasing those warnings, it makes you wonder if they're sort of collaborating to attack on one day, like to activate together. Because obviously the FBI is getting intel that they're planning attacks, and they're anticipating that, large gatherings like Easter or eclipse watching places, that those will be targets. But they're getting intel, obviously, that these terrorist cells are planning an attack, and they don't know when, obviously. And like I said, you have open borders to where they can come through and form these sleeper cells. You have no idea when they're going to activate. And with our disapproval in the Middle East, while also letting these terrorists in from those countries, if Iran launches an attack on Israel and decides to come at us too, they already have militants in our country, on our soil. It's not very smart to enable Iran while also letting them pour terrorists in through our wide open border. And like I said, with an Iranian attack looming within the coming days, who knows? Maybe they'll try to take us out too on top of Israel so that we can't support Israel fully. We got our hands full with terrorists running around wreaking havoc in our own country. We're very I don't have to talk anymore about how stupid the Biden administration is, but if we let them pour through our borders while also provoking them in the Middle East, well then they don't have to strike at us. They've already got soldiers in our country. And Hezbollah, they've already had their own terrorists caught at the border trying to get in, and who knows how many gotaways that there have been. Like I said, the FBI has said that those numbers are in the millions probably, but with the escalation in the Middle East, the chance of those cells just activating together across the U.S. and cities spread out the U.S., obviously that's not good. And, the FBI putting out these warnings, clearly they're getting intel that these groups are planning an attack on U.S. soil. And they're assuming that large gatherings like with the eclipse and Easter, like I said, that they would do it then, but that clearly shows that they have no idea when they're going to do it. They even said in the warning on Easter that they have no idea where or when, but they expected terrorist attacks to happen. How about that? They are expecting terrorist attacks to happen. And even if they're not, that just shows that, the intel is that they're planning an attack. And if they aren't happening when they think they're happening, then obviously the FBI is on a wild goose chase trying to figure this out. And they're not figuring it out. And if they all activate at once and they choose like one day we're going to activate all together, the FBI is behind the 8 ball because they don't even know where or when these will happen. They're just getting intel that there will be an attack. So, like I said, when we continue to enable Iran while also provoking Iran and organizations like Hezbollah while having their terrorists behind our back on our own soil, then they don't have to launch an attack. They can just activate those cells, and there you go. That's all they have to do. I wanted to point out there was a pro-Palestinian rally here in the U.S. where they were chanting "Death to America." How about that? How about your own citizens chanting "Death to America" in your own country? That not only shows the people that are here that don't like this country and that have come in through our borders, but it illustrates the potential of widespread attacks from within. Because you have these people spread out over the nation that hate America, they they're chanting death to America. They want the United States to collapse. And like I said, with the escalation in the Middle East, that will only encourage the terrorists who are here, the people who go to rallies like that and chant death to America, to partake in jihad and just start doing terrorist attacks. And you have these cells around our country, potentially, I'd like to say potentially, but the FBI has pretty much said that they are. They're just waiting. They're waiting to activate, and they're waiting for one day to do it all together. So, Iran's not scared of us because obviously they already have people on our own soil, so that they know that they got us. They've lulled us to sleep, and all they have to do is one more step, and they got us. And we have nobody to blame but Joe Biden and his weakness shown towards Iran, along with the open borders, for this to happen. So I just really wanted to illustrate, the FBI is putting out warnings of these terrorist attacks. Obviously, they're getting intel of something, of a terrorist attack looming potentially. They haven't been right on when that will happen, but that obviously shows you that they're behind the eight ball on this. They don't have it under control. They don't know when or where these attacks are going to take place. They just know that one's going to happen eventually, or they're expecting it. And the FBI have testified to this in Congress, that the red flags of a terrorist attack are going off like never before. And mentioned that, before 9/11, there were these sort of red flags that they didn't catch. And in comparison to then, before 9/11, that these are way worse and more widespread throughout the country, not just an isolated incident in New York City. We got cells spread out among the nation. That's a problem because we're provoking countries in the Middle East. They've already got troops here, pretty much terrorists here to do their job for them without having to strike us. So I just wanted to illustrate it, not to scare you, but to alert you that, look, the FBI is obviously getting intel of something, and keep your head on a swivel and prepare to know that these open borders have let these terrorists in, and with tensions in the Middle East on the rise, and we haven't made any friends over there, that they could potentially activate here and start launching attacks here. Fingers crossed that doesn't happen, but we're being lulled to sleep by Iran, apparently. And, organizations like Hezbollah already got cells here just waiting for the call to activate. And the FBI is fully, they're admitting this in Congress. They're testifying to it. And it's not getting much headlines because, mainstream media doesn't want you to know, especially the ones supporting Biden. But, and even incidents like what happened to Lake and Riley are happening, where these aren't cells activating. These are single illegal immigrants. I mean, these aren't even terrorists. Not let alone the terrorists that are coming through our border. Just the immigrants from these third world countries are doing crimes, and then we're letting them out on bail within a couple of hours later. I mean, you have illegal immigrants killing NYPD officers, and then they're out on bail like a couple hours later, flipping off the cameras. They don't care. These are the people that we're letting into our country. Not only the terrorists, but these people from third world countries that are just coming in and wreaking havoc on our own soil, to our own people. You have nobody to thank but Joe Biden. I want to talk about this before ending the episode. Another massive container ship coincidentally lost power near NYC's Verrazano Bridge. I don't think I'm saying that right. But now we've had a, quote, rare incident of these massive cargo ships losing power coincidentally near bridges. And it appears more likely that China was behind these attacks and is testing out its cyber technology on us. There's more and more people believe that the AT&T incident a couple months ago was a Chinese cyber attack. Also, there was that intel report from the NFSC claiming that China used its remote towing technology to take out that bridge in Baltimore. And now you just had another cargo ship, a massive cargo ship, much bigger than the one in Baltimore, I believe, losing its power right near a bridge. So it appears more and more likely that China is behind these attacks. And the experts who know the CCP and know their technology and their tendencies they're saying themselves that this is China. These are attacks from China. And that on top of these random de-escalatory attempts from the United States with China. You had a trip to China from Janet Yellen today, and it seems more and more likely that these claims are true when you have the government, trying to de-escalate with China and bow down and kiss their feet, and China has basically responded with saying stuff like, we're number one now, and you need to stop being bitter about it and launching trade wars against us and white-knuckling it, not letting us, basically just says stuff of stop being bitter that we're surpassing you sort of rhetoric. And, blaming us for launching a full-fledged trade war with us. And, they're not taking the route of wanting to get peace, and we're kind of just bowing down saying, we're so sorry, how can we fix this? And it's the same situation what we're doing with Iran and the Middle East is the same thing we're doing with China. We're showing weakness to our enemies, and this is what you get. So if this is true that China is behind these bridge incidents, especially the one in Baltimore, that these are declarations of war. I mean, these are terrorist attacks, especially at a strategic port like the one in Baltimore. I mean, so much of global trade comes through that port, including military equipment to Ukraine coming out of that port. I mean, these are terrorist attacks to hurt trade, not only with the U.S., but globally. That's a declaration of war. And if the United States government didn't know that, I'm assuming they did if they're having these de-escalatory trips to China, trying to improve relations, coincidentally at the same time of these attacks. I'm thinking that they know that they were behind this, and we're taking the weakness route of trying to talk things out with them, and it's not going to work. China is just going to continue to test out its cyber abilities on us, and they've even launched attacks on infrastructure grids like power plants and power grids. So what are they testing out? Obviously, they're trying to test out their abilities on us to do something, not something good either. So continued weakness from Joe Biden towards our enemies is who we have to thank for this. So I just wanted to mention that to say, looks like another container ship was victim to this remote towing technology from China potentially. Nothing's confirmed. I don't think anything will be confirmed of that from the U.S. government because they don't want us to think that Biden's weak and that countries like China are launching a war against us. But read between the lines and put the pieces of the puzzle together, it looks more and more likely that China is launching these attacks on us and testing out its cyber attack abilities on us. That is all the topics for today. I'll be back tomorrow for another episode.